In 1763, the British Empire stood at a turning point in North America. After defeating France in the French and Indian War, Britain gained control of a huge territory west of the Appalachian Mountains. To many colonists, this victory seemed to promise new land, new farms, and new opportunities. They believed they had helped win the land and expected to settle it freely. But the British government had a very different plan. That same year, King George III issued the Proclamation of 1763. This declaration drew a boundary along the Appalachian Mountains and forbade colonial settlement west of that line. In other words, the Crown told colonists that they could not move into the territory they had just fought to gain. Settlers who were already living beyond the line were ordered to leave, and private purchases of Native American land were restricted. Only the British government could approve those kinds of land deals. The purpose of the proclamation was practical from Britain's point of view. The war with France had just ended, but the frontier was still dangerous and unstable. Native American nations were defending their lands, and conflict along the western edge of the colonies threatened to drag Britain into more expensive wars. The Crown wanted to reduce violence, protect native lands, and make it easier to manage trade and settlement. Britain also hoped to control land speculation, which had become a major source of profit for wealthy colonists and land companies. A major reason for the proclamation was Pontiac's War, a native resistance movement that showed Britain how fragile control of the frontier really was. British leaders feared that if settlers kept moving west without limits, the empire would face repeated wars with native nations. The Proclamation of 1763 was meant to slow that process and create a buffer zone between colonial settlements and native territories. Britain also planned to enforce the line with troops stationed on the frontier, which showed how seriously it took the issue. But the colonists did not welcome the proclamation. To many of them, it felt like a betrayal. They had fought in the war, paid its costs, and helped expand Britain's power in North America. Now they were being told that the very land they believed they had earned was off limits. For farmers, veterans, and land speculators, Western land represented wealth, independence, and a future. The proclamation cut directly against those hopes. It also sent a strong message that Britain was willing to make decisions for the colonies without asking for their approval. This mattered because it deepened a growing resentment toward British rule. The Proclamation of 1763 was not a tax, but it still felt like an unfair restriction imposed by a distant government. Colonists increasingly believed that Britain did not understand their needs or respect their rights. If the Crown could decide where they could live, many began to wonder what else it could control. That question would become even more important in the years that followed. The proclamation also had major effects on the ground. Many colonists simply ignored it. Families moved west anyway, and land companies continued to claim territory beyond the line. The British government had trouble enforcing the policy across such a vast frontier. Even so, the proclamation remained important because it showed that Britain intended to tighten its control over the colonies after the war. It was one of the first clear signs that imperial policy and colonial expectations were moving in opposite directions. The effects on the colonies were political as well as economic. The proclamation limited expansion, blocked profit, and angered people who had expected freedom to spread westward. It also increased tensions between settlers and native nations, since many colonists still tried to enter forbidden territory. Instead of solving frontier problems completely, the proclamation exposed how difficult it would be for Britain to manage its North American empire. In the long run, the Proclamation of 1763 became an early warning sign of revolution. It did not cause the American Revolution by itself, but it helped create the atmosphere of frustration and distrust that made rebellion more likely. Colonists saw it as proof that Britain was becoming more controlling after the war, while Britain saw colonial resistance as proof that stronger authority was needed. That cycle of tension only grew stronger in the years that followed. So the Proclamation of 1763 was more than a boundary line on a map. It was a turning point in the relationship between Britain and the American colonies. It limited westward expansion, angered colonists, challenged their hopes for land and independence, and helped build the resentment that would later fuel the push for revolution. What Britain intended as a policy for peace ended up becoming one of the first major cracks in the relationship between empire and colony.